I need to admit, I'm not feeling 100% like myself today, but still I wanted to film. So hey and welcome to me being back in Germany. So I haven't had any breakfast so far and it's already 11 a.m. so I think, I need to wash my hands first and then I can. So the happiest I'm actually about these peaches here. In Germany we call them flat peaches, like Plattpfirsiche, and I love them, like that's the best thing ever. Where is it? Brötchen! We love Brötchen. That's like the basic breakfast thing here in Germany. For breakfast we eat Brötchen. Okay, I guess let's start. Nearly a year ago, I've quit my first job after university after only 6 months of working and decided that I want to go abroad. So I left Germany in August 2023 and actually I didn't really plan to come back, but here I am again and it was quite a ride going to Canada. It's kind of surreal sitting here now, especially because one of my last videos I made before I went to Canada was exactly here. Coming back to this town is called Oldenburg and it's in the northern part of Germany. It is weird because it seems like nothing changed in this town here, but so much changed in me. I know this is kind of a cheesy saying, but it is true. Like, so many things are different for me now, and let's begin with how I planned my year, how it started, how it went. So before I went to Canada, I planned on making kind of a big trip around Canada. I landed in Toronto, which is not very typical. Typically, most of the work and travelers start actually in Vancouver and end in Toronto. Yeah, but the flights were just cheaper and I felt that might be the right thing to do for me. After that, I wanted to go over Quebec down to Halifax because I was always a big Anne of Green Gables fan. I wanted to see Prince Edward Island. And after this, I was planning to go to Banff and Calgary and end my work and travel in Vancouver. So these were my first ideas, like nothing was a really settled plan. I just wanted to be open for everything. And a part of my plans I fulfilled. I went to Toronto and spent there my first few days in Canada. I stayed there for around a week, got to know people, especially other Germans who were actually leaving Canada now after their 1 year abroad experience. And I was so full of enthusiasm. I was just very happy to be in Canada when I arrived. The first few days went pretty well. I opened my banking account. I've got my social insurance numbers. I started communicating with the farm I would be staying, or I plan to stay for the next 4 to 6 weeks. And this is where I went next. And from then on, like, everything started to become pretty exhausting and rocky, to be honest. I was picked up by the farmer and a friend of hers because it turned out that the farmer can't drive and she don't even has a car. I was very flabbergasted about that because come on, she was like living on the countryside. There are no buses or anything you can take. And the US and Canada are not places where you can really like rely on public transport. You just need to have a car. This is just a fact. And from then on, it got weirder because we arrived at the farm. It turned out like it was a big farm with around 80 alpacas. And this lady, she was like 60-year-old, just lived there on her own. And all the people who worked at the farm were actually volunteers. The person who was the longest there was probably for around like 2 months there. And it was a German too, who like went to the alpaca farm to just work there for free and like, live. And it was so weird to me. And then I went in this house and it was, I still can't wrap my mind around that I just actually lived in this kind of house. Hi, Jen here from editing. I forgot really to include my reasons why I left the farm, and I didn't really describe the living situations, so I just wanted to include that it was not healthy, it was not hygienic, it was very disgusting. There were animals living in that house which were very sick. There were animals in that house living which peed and did other things on the floor in the kitchen where we were eating and spending our breaks. I was sleeping in a basement which was cold, freezing and moldy. I'm very sure it was moldy because it was very damp there. I just couldn't stay there any longer and I decided to leave. I decided to leave early 2 weeks after. At the same time, an American volunteer was leaving too, and she took me to Kingston. And this is where I boarded a bus and went to Ottawa. All in all, I feel like the farming experience was a good experience. It was very nice working in farming, like getting to know alpacas, getting to know other volunteers. They were mostly actually Germans too, or Austrians. So it was kind of nice to make some connections. And like working at a farm is like really work with your hands and with your whole body, and I really like that at this point. Just be very careful what kind of farm you pick, and be sure to read all the reviews under the farmer, because the farm I was at actually had pretty good reviews, but there were like a few reviews which weren't good. I didn't even get down to read them, but it turned out I should have done it. Just make sure that you really read the reviews carefully. So like I said, after that I left for Ottawa, and I planned to stay there for a few months because I wanted to stay at least a few months over the winter there and earn some money. Over Kijiji, I actually found a nice flat share, which was not too expensive. And yeah, but it turned out it was quite at the end of Ottawa. So I really needed to take some buses, and it took me around 1 hour and a few minutes from downtown to go there. This too changed how I was able to get work, because there were a few workplaces I could have worked, but they were just limited. It was not very thought through, but at this point when I was staying at the alpaca farm and found the flat share, I was just happy to have a place to stay and like finally get away from the farm. So yeah, I started to look for some barista jobs. That is what I initially planned all the time, that I wanted to do some barista jobs. And yeah, it took me 1 or 2 weeks until I found something, and another week or so until I finally started to work at the cafe. I think this is where one of the hardest parts of my work and travel started, because when I went away from my work and travel, I did that alone. And because I was staying in Ottawa for already like 4 weeks until I finally found a job, it was not even easy for me to like meet people. So I really felt isolated. And another thing which started to come in was that I started to get anxieties when it came to my money. The first few weeks I didn't really realize it, but later I realized how expensive it is living in Canada. I felt when I left Germany that I have enough money, and that probably through working I will like load up my banking account and have the option to like go to places like Calgary and Vancouver. But it turned out that Canada is a very expensive place. When I just saw my money going down and down and down, and because I left Germany with just my summer clothes, I've seen like the winter coming too, because it was all already the beginning of October, and I knew that Ottawa is a very cold place in winter, so it's not uncommon that you have like -20 degrees there sometimes, or at least -10. That really gave me a lot of anxiety. Yeah, at this time, I finally started to get to know new people at the cafe and befriended a lot of people. But I still felt very alone, and I think just my financial situation led for me to like overthink my work and travel plans. Especially this month of October was very, very draining on me. So I started to think about actually leaving Canada and go back to Germany at that point. But I talked to my friends, I talked to my family, and they said it would be a shame when you already would leave. I mean, you just arrived and this is like a one in a lifetime situation for you. And I really thought it through, and I was thinking, okay, what kind of options I could have otherwise than, you know, doing this work and travel like I did it at the moment. So I decided to make a medical exam for my visa to be able to work in childcare. I have a childcare background in Germany already, so this was something I always was very comfortable doing. And I was thinking when I could maybe find an au pair family and stay there, everything would be much easier for me, and I would definitely don't need to worry about the financial aspect, and still would be able to like connect to Canadians, like have the kind of cultural experience I was looking for. So this is when I started to apply for the visa extension. This was a long process. It cost me quite some money, but in the end, I was looking for au pair families, and I came across an au pair website where I met a family from the northern part of Ontario. They were actually wanting to move back to one of the northern communities, one of the remote communities there. And I don't know, like I still spoke to a few other families after this, but it just didn't let me go. Like this feeling of, oh my God, that would be such an amazing and interesting and different kind of experience. So I connected with them. I've met them even because I wanted to get a feeling like, how are these people? Would it still be safe for me to go to this place? Because like I said, it's a remote town, so it's not very easy to leave that place. I was thinking about the safety aspect, especially after my experience with the alpaca farm. And this was quite interesting because I've met that family and I really like them. Like a lot of things just, I don't know, like a lot of things just happened around that weekend. I don't know, a fire alarm went on, or I don't know, something with a car happened. Like a lot of like small things happened, like small accidents and stuff, but still was such a nice and so human experience for me that I thought, okay, this is my family. I want to stay with them. I want to go to Moosonee. I want to have that experience. So I went back to Ottawa after that, worked for another like 3 or 4 weeks. And then I packed my bags, quit my job at the cafe, said goodbye to my friends in Ottawa, and took a bus from Ottawa to Toronto. And after this, I took an airplane to Timmins. This is like one of the most northern cities in Ontario before like the remote communities. And after this, I stayed a night in Timmins and then went back to the airport and took a plane to Moosonee. And oh my God, the moment I arrived in Moosonee, I've never seen something like that. For real, like this town was something else. All right, a little change of scenery. And where was I? So, like I said, I arrived in Moosonee, and a few notes about Moosonee. Like I said, it's a remote town, so there are no streets or no highway which goes to Moosonee. So you can either take a train or a plane to go up there. Everything takes a while, especially when you have any packages or stuff. It won't be delivered like the next day, like you know it from the city. A lot of groceries are much more expensive because it just is a bigger effort to like get groceries up there. You can't grow any crops up there, so you're just like very dependent on the south to like get groceries and stuff. You don't have cafes, you don't have any restaurants. There are a few churches, like I said, one grocery store, a post office, and yeah, a gym, schools. And this is actually it. When I arrived there, my au pair family actually just moved back it is kind of interesting because they lived in Moosonee beforehand, and then they went back to the south. But then they went back and they needed some help with their children because they didn't have any family up there who can like help with daycare and stuff like this. So this is why, yeah, they needed someone like me. But because they already lived there, they just knew so much about Moosonee. Like they taught me so many like historical things. I've made a few videos about Moosonee. Unfortunately, they are all in German, but in case you're still interested to know a bit more about Moosonee, just like drop a comment or something, and maybe I just make another video in English for you then. When I arrived, there was already a bit of snow, but not completely, and the river was starting to freeze. This was one of the most interesting things I've seen in my life, from up there in an airplane, like seeing how the river was like freezing together. And wow, I arrived in Moosonee and moved in. I had a very beautiful room with a view on the river, and yeah. And this is actually where my work began. I was responsible for the children, of course. I mean, I was an au pair, but mostly for the youngest child, which wasn't going to daycare then. I took the kid a lot of times outside. I spent a lot of time inside too, or at an early on center where you could like, you know, just let the children play and everything like that. Yeah, and experience the cold northern winter. And this was so amazing, going outside about blue skies and sun and white snow. I took walks over the frozen river. I even took the car over the river. We went on a skidoo, like a snowmobile, and went on long rides with it. And it was such an amazing experience. I think there's no other place like the northern communities up there when you want to experience the winter season in like all its depth, and like feeling how it is living in minus 30 degrees or even minus 15 degrees. But unfortunately, not everything was amazing. My au pair family had a few like private problems. So yeah, like this really took me on risk with my job a few times. One time they even fired me. The firing was just like taken back, and I could stay until the end of the time, but it was very hard on me. Other than that, I've met a few people I befriended, but it turned out that the friendship didn't last. And yeah, and this really disappointed me because I wouldn't have thought that they would do that. That really made me sad, really like made my time so hard, especially because at some point I was really like thinking about staying in Moosonee. In Moosonee, they always look for qualified people for like specific jobs, and I was thinking about like taking a communication job in Moosonee and probably maybe staying in Canada for good. After I already decided that I would do this, like I changed my plans just because it was so draining after a while, and especially like my last months were very sad, and I just was so over it after a while. I turned 26 in Moosonee, and even when I was really looking for the safety of that place, I felt like an adult teenager somehow, because I really couldn't make any big decisions. I didn't took off. I was working 6 days a week. So yeah, I was kind of isolated and stuck in Moosonee often. So this was like the turning point of that experience, and how much I loved the first month and the winter. It got worse and worse when the spring started to arrive, and I don't know, I just was so ready after a while to leave, and we finally left town at the end of May. Now I think back on it, and I would never change that experience. Like, this was one of the most interesting and important experiences of my life, but I know that I don't really want to go back there. Moosonee is so interesting, but sometimes the people there don't really like think outside the box. And I don't know, I really couldn't like identify with that so good. So I don't know, like I was happy to leave at the end of May, and my au pair family and we've spent the first few summer weeks at the cottage. We had some like summer activities, even when it was kind of coldish then. And I went tubing, I went on boat rides, like we had a family weekend there with the whole family, which was amazing. And yeah, and this is when it was time for me to go. And to be honest, when I was leaving Mussolini at the end of May, I was so ready to go back to Germany. I was like, okay, like I'm done. I don't want to do it anymore. I'm so over it. But especially these like last few weeks in the south were so beautiful. I don't know, after this, I really had a blues about like going back to Germany. I didn't really wanted to. I wanted to stay a bit longer. I wanted to be with my family, and just like the dread of like leaving them, leaving the children I was so close to was so hard on me. And the last 2 days I was crying a lot. I've said a few times goodbye in my life. That's not the first time I've said goodbye in my life, but this time was one of the most hardest times of me saying goodbye to someone. It felt like a goodbye forever, and I'm still struggling with that a lot. I really do, because I really love these kids and I really love the family. But yeah, everything has an end, and I decided to go back to Germany. So this is how it is now. So yeah, and now I'm back in Germany and look back at this whole experience of nearly a year in Canada. And the first thought I had when I was back, I was like, oh my God, I want to go back to Canada. Like, how can I do this? What kind of visa options do I have? I've decided that I won't do it at first. I mean, I don't know how much I would change my mind about that topic in the future. But for now, I won't go back to Canada. Yeah, just to have a few last words about this experience and if I would recommend it. I think, and this is what I've said already a few times now, going to Canada was one of the best experiences of my life. Life-changing. I really got so close to myself, and especially I've learned that I really can get myself out of situations. I can rely that even when I'm in a situation that I don't feel good in, I can get myself out of there and I can find a solution for that. And this is one of my biggest learnings of Canada. I've learned that the solution to go is not always the right solution. Sometimes there are other ways. And when you really think about them, you can find them. In the end of it, it is worth to sit out that experience and try to experience a work and travel in a different way other than the way you planned originally. I've talked to a lot of people throughout this year. I've talked to a lot of people about work and travel, that a lot of people dream doing that, but there's never really the right time. But I've learned there's always a right time when you make time for it. It depends on you at the end. So in case you're thinking about doing that, I just can tell you, do it. It is worth it. Whatever struggles I had, how hard it was for me, it was the best thing I've ever did. And yeah, so here we are now, 1 year later, and I feel there are much more questions about what I'm going to do next than there were before. So this is actually what I will talk about on my channel now. How my life will go after my experience in Canada and what kind of stuff I figured out for myself. I will make a new video about this very, very soon. Yeah. So thank you so much for following that review, that video, and I hope we see each other soon on this channel. And yeah, thank you so much. Bye bye.